Hi, I'm Dr. Sridhar Ganapathy, a practicing pediatrician from Mumbai. Welcome to the Steer channel, an educational initiative by my teacher, Dr. Y.K. Amdekar. The topic for the day, hydration therapy. It's needed to understand the need for this topic before we proceed. So when you look at the human body, 60% by weight is water. Two-thirds of this is in the intracellular compartment and one-third is in the extracellular compartment. In the extracellular compartment, the bulk is in the interstitium. 7% of the body weight is in the intravascular compartment. And the rest is in the transcellular compartment, which could be like the synovial fluid, the fluid in the eyes, the CSF, and the others. When you look at individual components of the body, what we do see is the muscle has a muscular person will have much more water than an adipose or a fat individual. Males also tend to have more water than females, and in infancy, the water content is much more than in adults. Now, this water movement, how does this water movement occur? The water movement occurs with solute movement and osmotic pressure, hydrostatic pressure, the glycocalyx and the membrane permeability, aquaporins. These are many factors that are concerned with water movement. When we talk about hydration therapy, we need to know about what goes in and what goes out. So let's first understand what goes out. So when you look at what goes out, you're losing fluids by sweating. You're losing fluids when you're breathing. You're losing fluids by urination and by stool. But what you need to understand that when you're sweating, the water content is significantly very high compared to the other systems. And why you need to understand this is when you're doing fluid therapy, the fluid that is replaced should be a mimic of what is lost. Also, you need to understand for every 100 kilocalories that is being utilized by the body, you require about 100 ml of fluid. So this gives you a basic idea about input, output, how much should get in so that you could compensate for daily losses. And this is called as maintenance fluid for the daily losses. You have other types of fluid therapy wherein you tend to restore what is lost in excess, like in gastroenteritis, or too much of urinary loss, like a diabetic ketoacidosis. There are conditions wherein you try to resurrect or replace what has been lost so as to rectify the electrolyte and fluid imbalance. And the last category would be when your patient is in shock, a hypovolemic shock, and you have to resuscitate with fluids. Coming back to fluids, what are the routes by which I could give fluids? I could give it by the oral route or the enteral route, which is the best physiological route. So it could be oral, it could be through a nasogastric tube, orogastric tube, or it could be parenteral when I am not able to achieve adequate hydration by the oral route. I need a parenteral route, and the parenteral route that we use is either intravenous or in real crisis intraosseous. The types of fluid that we use in order to establish good hydration. You need to understand that in hydration, it's fluids, it is electrolytes and energy. You need to provide energy because you don't want starvation ketosis. What are the types of fluids that are there in the market? One is homemade. So when I am treating a gastroenteritis or I've got fluid loss due to being a marathoner, I need to have a fluid mimic that mimics the loss. So the best fluid to give when I am having loose motions would be an oral rehydrating solution, which is isotonic with my plasma. So we initially had the WHO formula, which came in the 60s, which had a sodium of around 90 and a sugar of 111, and the osmolality was a little more than the blood osmolality. It was very beneficial in cholera patients and it was life saving. Then we realized that for other types of diarrhea, the low osmolality would be much better, which had an osmolality of 245 with the sugar having and the sodium having brought down to 75, because then the osmotic load in the intestine would be less and the amount of loss through the fecal output would be much less. Why is it that we add sugar to all these ORS? One is starvation ketosis. Two, sugar has a tendency to carry the sodium along with it and the water follows it because the syn porters, that is the SGLT1s, are preserved even in a toxigenic diarrhea like cholera. The other solution that we changed to from low molecular weight ORS was the Risomal, because we realized that in malnourished children they may have a fluid overload in their system, they may be deficient more in potassium, so we reduce the sodium load and we increase the potassium in that solution, and that was called the Risomal. So we had a standard ORS, we had a low molecular weight ORS, and a Risomal which hit the market. Then we started modifying ORS because we still wanted to reduce the osmotic load in the ORS. So what we did is we replaced the glucose with starch, rice, wheat, maize. So when you put a polysaccharide there, the osmotic load comes down, the energy burden, the energy uptake is much better. There is a slow breakdown of the polysaccharides and the osmotic load in the intestine is less. So they were called as the super ORS, and we even tried to introduce certain amino acids that were beneficial in the transportation of sodium and water. When we looked at marathoners who had a lot of water loss, what we did realize is because they tend to take so much of water and very little of electrolytes, we did experience a number of these marathoners coming with an exercise associated hyponatremia. So we decided that it's always better to train for the marathon. Don't just jump into a marathon, train for the marathon, have enough stock in your body of fluids and electrolytes in the right balance. And isotonic solutions are very beneficial. A lot of sports drinks in the market which are also good, and there are also sports drinks which have certain amino acids like leucine, isoleucine, valine, which would help in muscle repair. So the teaching again is your fluid which is being replaced should be a mimic of what is being lost. Let's get into parenteral therapy. Parenteral therapy is when you have to give a very large amount and it's not possible and you need IV fluids. So here we have two big categories, crystalloids and colloids. And the crystalloids are solutes dissolved in water, small molecules, which can just move from the interstitium to the intravascular compartment. They are basically feeding the interstitium. You need to understand this. Whereas the colloids are big particles that remain intravascular, so they are very good for vascular expansion. In the crystalloid section, you have balanced crystalloids in the form of ringer lactate, ringer acetate, plasma light, osmolality, composition very close to that of blood. And they have bicarbonate donors in the form of lactate, acetate, gluconate. Lactate can get converted only in the liver. So when you're giving ringer lactate, we usually have that caution that the liver is functioning appropriately so that the lactate can be converted into bicarbonate. Whereas acetate and gluconate can be converted at other sites. In the unbalanced preparations, you have the D5, you have the normal saline, you have the DNS. Here the glucose gives you energy. The problem with the D5 solution is even though in the packet the osmolality is coming close to that of blood, the moment you infuse and the glucose is utilized, it is free water. The problem with normal saline, which is a great agent for resuscitation, especially when you come in hypovolemic states in following gastroenteritis or even in a condition like DKA, is basically it has too much of sodium and chloride, 154 of each, so that the osmolality is around 308, a little more than that of plasma. And when you infuse huge amounts, the problem is you may end up with metabolic, hypochloremic metabolic acidosis. So the balanced formulations are always preferred. Coming to colloids, the best colloid is albumin. You have the starch preparations, the gelatins, which are there in the market. What is best about albumin is the oncotic pressure that it exerts, so the intravascular compartment fills up, but you also need to know that there is a significant amount of albumin in the interstitium. They have an allergic potential, and when you use things like starch and gelatin, in addition to allergy, they could affect the kidneys, they could affect coagulation because some of them do affect the von Willebrand factor. And when you don't get an IV site, you may resort to an intraosseous site. What are the modes of parenteral therapy or the therapeutics in hydration and parenteral therapy? It could be resuscitative when you are in shock. It could be correction when you have an electrolyte and fluid imbalance. It could be restoring the ongoing loss, especially when you're waiting for a procedure or a surgery when you're kept nil by months, or when you are having an intestinal obstruction and you have a port which is draining like the Ryan's tube. You do know that when you're persistently vomiting, you're losing a lot of sodium, losing a lot of hydrogen ions, and you end up in a hypokalemic state. The best IV fluid then would be an isolite preparation like Isolite G. So understand that hydration is very important to maintain your internal homeostasis, and this is fluid, electrolytes, and energy together. Fluids can be detrimental. Choose your fluids sensibly. ORS has come a big way in salvaging children who would have died because of acute gastroenteritis. And you need to understand what is being lost to replace. Thank you.